After a very long time, some of our members and we are meeting together, and no better time than this to celebrate 20 years of this amazing network. Um, Sorry, we're still sorting out a few tech things, so if you hear echoes and all kinds of things, just ignore them. Um, Let me just say that, today is the third day, so while I have the mic, I can say this, um, that it's so special that we are celebrating this network. Um, and, at a time like this in India, where there is so much divisiveness, um, and, to have a network of this kind of 600 women journalists run in this democratic, non-hierarchical, supportive, and multi-generational way is, I think, something very unusual and certainly something to celebrate. And also to remember that even as we celebrate, there are often people, a network like this doesn't happen automatically. It is actually because there are people behind the scenes who have worked very hard to keep us all together, all of us with our very strong opinions. They often go unacknowledged. I don't want to start naming names because there'll always be some people who we will forget. So I just want to say it's a combination of people who may not be seen in front of everything, but who are actually supporting this network. So I want to raise a toast to all our comrades all over India, 600 and more, who have kept this amazing network going for 20 years. Okay, now to the discussion at hand, to come down to it. So I think there's no better time than this to speak about these so-called soft issues that have to be addressed. So, I've been a journalist now for 5 decades. And this has been one of my pet peeves that I know other people have heard me talk about and got bored with the idea that I keep coming up with this. But I'm now more and more convinced that this hard and soft is a male construct, that no woman would have thought of this. And because, women know what is really hard work. They don't have to be told. And it's not even acknowledged, and it's relegated to the soft areas of life. So I think exactly the same in journalism. So I believe that actually the so-called soft beats are the ones that require the hardest amount of work, which often goes unacknowledged. And the more glamorous beats like politics or business, which get a lot of leeway within the media, are called hard beats. And I find that really ironical, that that is the way things are. And just to briefly say about my own entry into journalism, environmental journalism, actually it was totally by accident. Um, in the 1970s, I was the editor of a small magazine here in Mumbai called Himmat, of which Rajmohan Gandhi was the editor-in-chief. And this was during the emergency when, as all of you know, there was censorship. And I had the task, along with my colleagues, to take our copy to the censor, who would sit in what was then called Sachivalay, now called Mantralay. And he would go through it and quite often knock off entire articles, And this was just before publication time, so it was very tense. So we literally had to keep things handy so that we could substitute the articles that had been cut with something else. Now, in the 70s was the time actually that the first consciousness on environmental issues began with the Stockholm Summit, which was attended by Indira Gandhi. And she made this famous statement about poverty being one of the biggest polluters, an issue that can be debated. But I know for many people, it became a subject that you talked about. And in London, there was an organization called EarthScan, which was set up. And Anil Agarwal from India was working with them. And they were producing these excellent features, which, for a small magazine like ours, they would land at our table. We didn't have to edit them. They were very well written, well researched. So EarthScan features on various aspects of the environment around the world were our standby when the censor knocked off something where we were trying to go as far as we possibly could go. So that was my education in a sense on environmental issues. And because of this consciousness that was created during that time of the emergency, we actually decided that we will continue to work on environmental issues. And again, with a shoestring budget, we tried to figure out what are the things we could report on that would make people understand that environmentalism is not just about wildlife, but actually the impact that is having on people. So for instance, the pollution in rural areas where small industries were set up were often go unnoticed. And Himmat was one of those that actually wrote about it before mainstream media. My personal education on environmental journalism began in the 1980s when I worked with Anil Agarwal at the Center for Science and Environment to edit the first citizens report on the state of India's environment. And it gave me a perspective on all these issues, ranging from energy to water to land to forests to health. And all of it has really held me in good stead because, as I said, it was a citizens report. So the focus is very much of the impact of policy and environmental science on people. When I entered mainstream journalism with Indian Express in 1983, at that time, at least some papers, of course, depending very much on editors, it was not as if it was universal policy, were actually encouraging writing on these issues. Express, for instance, at that point had a designated developmental correspondent, which is really unusual. Shevanti Nayanan, who's now a well-known journalist, was that. And they gave space for writing on environmental issues, paid for travel to go to places because you had to do that. You couldn't do it sitting at a desk in Delhi. And other papers had agriculture correspondent, education correspondent, labor correspondent, and of course, health, and then later environment. But in my view, things changed very drastically in the 1990s once news came to be defined as something that should sell the newspaper. So once you do that, once a newspaper or a magazine is viewed as a profit center, the focus of coverage, even on these kind of issues, changes. So this is some of the things that we will discuss in this panel because the participants in the panel also have their own experience, but I'm just narrating it from my old age and the years that I've managed to survive in journalism. But, basically I saw in my own experience that health, for instance, became wellness and lifestyle, right? And that is what the market dictates. So that is what health was interpreted as. So health reporters were expected to do that. Similarly, environment became personal choices, of in urban areas, issues on open spaces, on bicycling, without addressing, for instance, sources of pollution like landfills that continue to kill the poor in even our richest cities, such as Bombay, or the culpability of private industry in dumping toxic waste in rural areas that poisons the groundwater, or questioning the large infrastructure projects that affect biodiversity and the livelihood of poor and benefit only the well-heeled. So this kind of writing started receding, and instead we started getting much more about, things that the urban middle class could relate to. I think the last 2 years of the pandemic has been, in a sense, a wake-up call. So something like health, which, as I said, was designated as a soft beat, is obviously the most important. And we have seen that informed reporters writing on health, who understand the science, the economics, and the politics of healthcare, are the ones who've done the best reporting. And coincidentally or otherwise, most of them are women. So you just go through all the bylines of those who've written on health in the last 2 years, and you'll find most of them are women. And in the face of global warming, including the latest IPCC report, which has, a nightmare scenario for India, one hopes that the media will wake up and address this, but I'm not counting on it yet, because I think a lot of the writing still is derivative, is based on reports coming from elsewhere, rather than sending out teams of people to actually look at what is going to happen if what is predicted by the IPCC report comes true. I'm saying all these things as by way of introduction, but it's really the experience of those who are writing on these issues that will inform us best on how we should look at the future. There's a future for this kind of reporting? If there is, what should be the focus of that kind of reporting? And that is going to be the focus of our panel discussion. And I'm really delighted that we have Menaka Rao, Ramya Kannan, Jisha Elizabeth, Chandrani Sinha, Jayashree Bokli. Let me just introduce briefly each of them. So Jayashree is a journalist with Dainik Bhaskar and Divya Marathi, based in Pune. And she's been a journalist for the last 20 years. And she's worked in Pune and in other parts of Maharashtra. And she reports on environment and other areas. Jisha Elizabeth is an environmental journalist working as a senior sub-editor with Madhyamam. She's one of the executive members of the Kerala Union of Working Journalists. She has joined us, I think. Yeah. Ramya Kannan is an old colleague of mine from my days in The Hindu. She's the Hindu's Tamil Nadu bureau chief, writing on health and development issues for at least the last couple of decades. And it's great that she's able to join us. Menaka Rao, I know her byline from when she wrote on health when she was based here in Mumbai. Is an independent journalist and podcaster who writes on issues related to health and law. She's the consulting editor with podcasting platform Suno India and tweets at Nen Rao. Chandrani Sinha joins us from Guwahati. She's an independent multimedia journalist based in Guwahati. She has written on climate change in conflict areas and has been reporting stories from Northeast India for the past 10 years. So let's begin. And what I'd like is for each one of you to say in about 4 or 5 minutes to really speak about your own career path. How did you enter journalism and why did you end up writing on health and environmental issues? Was it an editor who asked you? Was it something that you felt passionately about? Did you have to go and get more training to do it? And also, if you were working full-time with a newspaper or a magazine and they did not give you the space to write on this issue, did you feel compelled to move to being a freelancer or an independent journalist? And do you find that it's better to report exclusively on health and environment rather than like one of the many beats you do because of the kind of concentration that it requires? Or do you think any reporter can be just put to the job and do it? So let me start. I'm going to also speak a little bit in Hindi because Jayashree is more comfortable in Hindi. I won't speak in Marathi because then it will just be a conversation between Jayashree and me. So why don't we start with you, Jayashree? आप हमें बताइए कि आपको क्या लगता है कि आपने अपने आप ये चूज किया एनवायरनमेंट रिपोर्टिंग के बारे में कि आपको ये असाइन किया गया? कितना मुश्किल है जब आप अपने एडिटर से कहते हैं कि मुझे इसके बारे में लिखना है? क्या वो मानते हैं? आपकी 4-5 मिनट में अगर आप बता दें तो अच्छा होगा।
Thank you, Kalpana. I'm audible? Hello?
Yes, you're audible. Yeah.
Okay. Thanks, Kalpana and all NWMI friends to give me this opportunity to be a panelist and speak about something about my 20 years work. So regarding Kalpana's question, मैं ये कहना चाहूंगी, 2 बातें पहले से ही क्लियर करती हूँ कि I'm talking about only regional media, that is Marathi. I'm talking about issues of environmental sector, जो मराठी मीडिया में दिखते हैं मुझे last 20 years से. और दूसरी बात यह है कि I'm talking about only print media, not any audio visual media or digital media, because कि मैं सिर्फ और सिर्फ print media से relate करती हूँ. So शुरू कैसे हुआ, ये जो कल्पना ने पूछा अभी, उसका जवाब in short ये है कि in a millennium year, that is 2000, मैंने शुरू किया as a student, as a trainee reporter in लोकमत newspapers group. वहां पे मैंने शुरू किया और एनवायरमेंटल जर्नलिज्म में एंट्री भी 2001 में हुई. वो इंसिडेंट मैं थोड़ा सा कहना चाहूंगी 2 वाक्यों में, सेंटेंस में, कि 2001 में पुणे के सबसे क्राउडेड, सबसे पोल्यूटेड, सबसे हैपनिंग रोड जो है कर्वे रोड, उस कर्वे रोड पे एक लेपर्ड आया सुबह सुबह. और ये इवेंट ऐसा था कि तब तक पुणे ने ऐसा कुछ कभी एक्सपीरियंस नहीं किया था कि एक टोटली वाइल्ड एनिमल एक पूरे सिविलाइज सेक्टर में, क्राउडेड एरिया में, जिसमें सिर्फ और सिर्फ व्हीकल्स ही दिखते हैं, और अगर और कुछ दिखे तो आदमी दिखते हैं। ऐसे में इस लेपर्ड का आना itself is a डिफरेंट एक्सपीरियंस। और हमारे एडिटर ने मुझे भेजा कि आप जाओ और इसको कवर करो। उस टाइम हम सब जानते हैं कि मोबाइल जैसा आज हम यूज करते हैं वैसी कुछ बातें नहीं थी। 2001 में गूगल भी नहीं था। और मेरा एक्सपीरियंस ये रहा कि वो लेपर्ड, उसको रेस्क्यू करने के लिए करीबन 8 घंटे लगे, 8 आवर्स लॉन्ग जर्नी। और उसको डांट मारा गया। वो डांट मारने के लिए जो लगते थे वो भी नहीं थे पहले। तो स्टोरिया कहाँ से शुरू होती ये भी मैं बताना चाहूंगी कि ये हमारा एक तरह का ट्रेनिंग था कि हाउ यू रिपोर्ट इट, कि सिर्फ एक लेपर्ड आया सिविलाइज सेक्टर में ये बात नहीं थी, उसके आगे पीछे बहुत कुछ था। और मुझे याद है कि 19 साल पहले मैंने कम से कम इसी एक इंसिडेंट पे 20 स्टोरीज तो जरूर लिखी होगी, अलग अलग मोड पे, अलग अलग मुद्दों को लेकर। तो दिस इज अ टर्निंग पॉइंट, दिस इज अ सेक्टर। कल्पना ने जैसा कहा कि आगे क्या हुआ, तो ये एक्सपीरियंस ऐसा रहा कि फॉरेस्ट ऑफिशियल्स से बहुत जान पहचान बढ़ी इस घटना से, और उनसे मुझे बहुत कुछ सीखने को मिला। फिर एक्सपर्ट के साथ बातें हुई, उनसे सीखने को मिला। और उसके आगे के 4 या 5 साल मैंने सिर्फ पढ़ा, रीडिंग ओनली, क्योंकि उस टाइम गूगल इतना नहीं था, तो हमको एक्सेस भी नहीं था रीजनल मीडिया के लिए। तो बस बुक्स पढ़ते रहे, लोगों से सुनते रहे उनके एक्सपीरियंस, उनके अनुभव, और वहां से शुरू हुआ। और अराउंड 2006 और 7 मुझे ये लगा कि मुझे इस फील्ड में दिलचस्पी है। द फील्ड इज नियर एंड डियर टू मी डे बाय डे। सो दिस काइंड ऑफ थिंग हैपेंड विथ मी। एंड साइमल्टेनियसली 2002 में मैंने लोकमत न्यूज़पेपर छोड़ के मुझे सकाळ न्यूज़पेपर ने बुलाया, इनवाइट किया, और मैं सकाळ में चली गई। तो 2012 तक मैं वहीं पे थी। और उसके बाद दैनिक भास्कर ने इनवाइट किया, इसलिए अब दैनिक भास्कर से साथ काम करती हूँ। आई एम नॉट अ इंडिपेंडेंट जर्नलिस्ट, आई एम नॉट अ फ्रीलांसर, आई एम टोटली अ सैलरीड पर्सन। And right now I'm working in Pune as a bureau chief for Dainik Bhaskar and Divya Marathi. I'm looking after each and every bit, including crime and court, and including politics to defense also. So environmental journalism ये बात मेरे सब कामों का एक पार्ट है। Although it is near and dear to me, आज की परिस्थिति ऐसी है कि मेरे साथ और सभी बीट्स की जिम्मेदारियां है। I have to look after them. एंड जो मेरा सबसे करीबी बीट है उसके लिए मुझे ज्यादा वक्त नहीं मिलता। और हम सब जानते हैं कि एनवायरनमेंट में अगर कुछ काम करना है तो आपको फील्ड वर्क जरूरी होता है। उस फील्ड वर्क के लिए मुझे वक्त कम मिलता है, दैट इज द प्रॉब्लम। ओके, ओवर टू कल्पना प्लीज।
थैंक यू जयश्री। एक्चुअली जो आपने एग्जांपल दिया लेपर्ड के बारे में वेरी इंटरेस्टिंग, क्योंकि पहले एनवायरनमेंट केवल वाइल्ड लाइफ के बारे में था, कंजर्वेशन ओरिएंटेड, एंड नाउ इंक्रीजिंगली यू कांट just write about wildlife, because wildlife is coming into what are areas like urban areas, and that is creating a consciousness about both things, that about conservation, about creating areas where wildlife is safe, and does not need to then encroach into areas. Rather, we have encroached into their areas actually.
Right.
Urban areas have eaten into surrounding forests, and that is what's creating this man woman animal conflict, person animal conflict. We used to always call it man animal conflict, and now we are wiser to that one. So thank you for that. Could I now ask maybe Ramya? Ramya, first of all, let me say, Jayashree, you're lucky to be in a salaried job. There are many journalists who are compelled to be independent, as they call it, but often it's independent and poor. So Ramya, you're also one of the lucky ones who is in a salaried job at the Hindu, my old newspaper, which when I was there, I don't know whether they still do it, but we used to do a survey of the environment. I was one of the editors of that for many years. And we had people writing from all over the country and often from around the world on issues to do with the environment. And it was much appreciated that a newspaper actually put its weight behind something like this. And I know through the 90s, when all the different conferences took place, at least two of us from the Hindu were sent to cover each one of them, which gave us not only a chance to understand issues of the environment on a global level, but also to meet the people of science who could explain more clearly the issues that lie behind many of these things like global warming and climate change, which are not always comprehensible to ordinary people in terms of how it relates to their lives. So would you say that some of that still remains? I'm not asking you to talk specifically about the Hindu, but as a mainstream print journalist, or do you feel like I have suggested that that kind of in-depth reporting has more or less disappeared? And what is your own experience on both environment and health issues when you're working for a large newspaper like the Hindu?
Hi, and thank you, Kalpana. It's so good to see you after all these years. And also would like to thank NWMI because this is one organization, a network, a fellowship that invariably sort of, puts its finger on the nub on the issues of the day, the issues that have to be. And I think this is a very, very critical issue on whether what were considered soft beats have now moved. Apologies, Kalpana, but I'm using what they used to use, have now moved into the mainstream. So if I may just, I finished my journalism at ACJ, the Asian College of Journalism, when it was in Bangalore, just to give you a brief. And I entered the Hindu. This was in '97. And when I did come into the Hindu, I was the only woman in the reporting section of the newspaper. There were many, many sub-editors. There was one other woman reporter, Ashwati Varghese, but who was not there at that point of time. She came back 6 months later. And so as we all know, I mean, you're young and you start off and you do a bit of everything. You do crime, you do, a bit of everything at the lower level. You don't do politics yet. So a bit of crime, bit of reviews, bit of film reviews, food reviews, features, city features, civic issues, all kinds of stuff. And then, I asked for, because I had come into journalism. In fact, I went from the school to the newsroom, literally. And I wanted to change the world one story at a time. I'm sure that's still true for all of us. And so I decided to do the so-called soft beats. Everyone was happy to allow me to do them because at that point of time, in the small unit in which I worked, it was okay for me to take them. I was very, very intent. I was extremely serious about what I did, and I enjoyed myself so much. I loved what I was doing. Development sector, health sector, and the environment sector taught me so much on a daily basis. Meeting the people, meeting experts, going to these conferences, meeting these are the people at the pinnacle of their careers, and they were the experts. And it was such a delight meeting all of them and writing those stories in a manner, I believe, that could, like Kalpana said already, in a manner that would convey the seriousness of the issue to the public. So health itself, how I came into health itself was quite serendipitous. There was another reporter covering health, and he decided to quit, or he went on a sabbatical. And, there I was. I was doing the other soft beats anyway. Okay, chalo, let's give it to her. But I was very happy right from the beginning because, again, I was learning so much. It was a time, the 90s, late 90s and beginning with the 2000s, that there was so much awareness on HIV and AIDS and tuberculosis as such. And I benefited a lot from, in fact, the later part of my career has been shaped by these, fellowships and conferences and awareness workshops that were conducted by the various organizations, including the UN bodies. They, were very good in, one, having you ask the right questions, and two, convey the information in a manner that's best understood without too much difficulty. I mean, this is a field where there is so much jargon already. And this was something that we had to sort of break it down for the people that we write for. And I believe that this still continues to this date. That is at the core of what we do. And we should continue to do it as long as we write on health or environment and development issues. So these really helped this exposure to the outside world, to others who are writing on health across the country and across the world. Sometimes that made a lot of difference. There was a lot of sharing of ideas, and that gives you a lot of confidence, and also, things that you can be inspired from what others do in other countries. So, I have always been a full-timer, and one of the stories that really made a difference both for us and for the community at large was we did a series in the 2000s on biomedical waste in Tamil Nadu, and how the callous treatment of biomedical waste was staring us in the face and no one was doing anything about it. So we did a series one after the other, and Pat, there was literally at the end of it, we did a long series, and at the end of it, there was a government policy, which then was subsequently refined, and subsequently, it evolved also into a better policy over the years. But I would like to think that we had a small role to play in that, because we also used some really graphic pictures that told the tale better. Then coming down to the pandemic, the most significant years, I think, in a sense, have been the pandemic, the last 2 years or so. Like one of my scientist friends says, this pandemic has been the revenge of science. And I think also it has been the revenge of health, environment, and development reporting. These fields have come back to the main pages, or if they have never been there, they've been dragged onto the main pages. They've been dragged onto the lead. These were masthead stories. During the last 2 years, we've seen that the so-called soft tweets suddenly were not soft anymore. You had health stories. In fact, over the last 2 years, I think maybe 1.5 years, we would have had stories on health itself, core areas of health, on COVID-19, on vaccination, on access, on equity, on ability to reach contraceptives, on a whole range of issues that women, children, violence during the pandemic, violence against women during the pandemic, domestic abuse, the disruption of access to universal vaccination. So these issues came to the forefront. They were lead stories, they were packages, they were explainers. And this is not just the print media, but all kinds of media decided that this was important. This was as important as the war in Ukraine, or Indo-Pak relations, or the bombing of Syria and refugees. So these stories came, I think, and thankfully, into the limelight. A lot of women, like you said, Kalpana, a lot of women are writing these stories. But one thing I noticed was that since these stories were on page one, now the men also wanted to write these stories again. So non-health reporters, at some point of time, since we were writing so many stories, non-health reporters also started reporting on health issues. Health became policy, policy became, I don't know, everything revolved around COVID in one sense of the term. And I think the challenge now is to keep these stories on the front pages, to keep these beats, continue to give those beats the significance, and to ensure that our stories, to push the envelope until these stories continue to remain on the front pages. Like to stop there, Kalpana, in case there are questions later. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Ramya. I think you've calling the revenge of health, environment, and development reporting is very good formulation. But even though they have made it to the front page, there's one thing that's sure to knock off everything, which is elections and politics in this country. You can have a war in Ukraine, you can have anything going on around the world, but once there's elections, everything else gets knocked off. I mean, that is a reality. The other thing is that we can take it up later in questions, but it's something that I've wondered about because, the pandemic really brought out the importance of public health issues, right? And this is something that has got diverted with the corporatization of the media, that we have had more writing on private health and investment in that, and also in the pharma industry, rather than talking about the status of public health, which affects the maximum number of people. And it's at a time of the pandemic that you realize again how crucial that is. And my fear is that as things recede, that kind of focus that is necessary even now, irrespective of whether the pandemic, whether we have a fourth wave or whatever, will be lost unless we find ways in which those who have understood this and how closely it is linked with policy, with the economy, with the role of the private sector in the economy, to make sure that the issues of public health remain. So we can come back to that, but thank you for what you've said. And so while we are on health, maybe could I ask Menaka Rao to speak about, because this is one of her areas of focus for many years. So Menaka, I think apart from your own experience, you whether you write on it or not now, have you noticed there's a shift in the way in which health reporting is done, or do you feel that it is getting better and there's more space being provided? And how difficult is it once you step out of a mainstream organization to get your stories placed, regardless of the amount of work you do or its topicality, when it is an issue like health?
I think for us, just to answer your question, I feel that people are doing better reporting than as you said, the awareness about public health was not that good, maybe when I started reporting, in Bombay, and I was working for DNA and HT, and, that time, as you said, we were reporting more, we were asked to report more on what was called lifestyle. And it was hard to, I think Ramya didn't have that experience, maybe because she worked for Hindu, but, for us, we were asked to write things a certain way, and, and public health reporting was just that going to KM or Sion and find this one case which was unusual. Often it was like that. And, this case with this surgery which is unusual or something like that. Or, or there is this big tragedy and, everybody ends up in one of these public hospitals. And, even those stories were not carried really well, because the person who is sort of writing about the tragedy from a larger angle, from a political or different angle, that story would go first, So, I feel now that at least during the waves, health reporting obviously takes precedence, and then I feel that during election, people don't talk about it. You're right about that. Elections, I think apart from, Delhi government, which made it an issue, I don't see too many people making health a public, an issue like UP, they sort of BJP referred to it, but it was not like the center stage issue. About me, I worked as a legal reporter in 2005 when, Mumbai Mirror was launched. And that time there were like a lot of newspapers which had launched at the same time. And I switched two newspapers doing the same thing and basically going to Sessions Court, High Court, and I got tired of that. And basically very bored. And the monotony of basically visiting these sites got to me. And, we were, in my case, I was also going to jail, literally. Because, I was covering the 2008 terror attack case. And before that, the 93 blast, a part of it, it was just literally you're sitting in one space with, no cell phone, no news. There was nothing to do except sit in one place with 10 other people, right? So it got to me. And then in DNA, when I switched, what had happened in DNA is that DNA office at that time in Bombay, they used to subscribe to all kinds of magazines. And I got really fascinated with New Yorker. And that time I got really into long form journalism, and I thought this is awesome, and I want to like do something which is basically a bigger canvas. And maybe I was naive, but I thought that health is a great beat, and I basically asked people, please, like let me change my beat, and I'm really tired of doing this. And it worked out for me. What I was unprepared for is basically a completely fall down the ladder, right? Because legal reporting is, you're taken very, and Bombay, especially, like high court copies were going page one so often, like high court or sessions court. Like it was really, and then, from a serious journalist, you become this journalist who is supposed to, and it was hard in the sense that because I was already at a certain level, I had finished 6 years of journalism. I did not have that leeway to sort of explore like a young reporter is allowed to, right? And what you are expected to do is, follow the PR cycle and cover what is called lifestyle. And, it's a term that I completely detest. And I teach in this Flame University, Pune, and there's one kid who tells me that she wants to do lifestyle reporting. I just don't know what to tell her. Like I just, so it's really like an awful term, you just, it's completely meant only for like, a certain section of people who think that their problems start and end with becoming fat. Okay. So it's just ridiculous. But for some reason, I think in this case, the legal reporting helped me because, there was no PR approaching me for anything in legal reporting, right? I am seeking the story. And I'm like, this is strange. This is unusual. I can't do this. Like, it just felt wrong. And I think we were at that time, we were also expected to write these packages, explanatory packages, but which would have been okay if it was reporting driven. But what would often happen is that, we would be called like sometime around 1 or 2 in the afternoon after the edit meet. And we were given a brief, okay, write, I don't know, 1,000 words on so-and-so with 3 boxes. Okay, this boxes was a big deal. Like you had to write with boxes. And then, we were just sitting and making calls and, not meeting anyone, just making calls and writing and writing and writing. Okay. It didn't matter. Sometimes it felt like it didn't matter what you wrote. You just wrote. It was like this, they used to call it page bharo andolan, like page bharo abhiyan, sorry. Like you're just writing and writing, and it was just ridiculous. And if you ask me what I wrote about, I have no idea I can't remember a single story that, stands out or anything. So it obviously, needless to say, it didn't satisfy me. And, but, like you have to learn on, and writing on health is a very steep learning curve. And I think Ramya would about, it's very, you start with going to hospitals, and then, you're trying to understand, acha, there is a food poisoning somewhere. Okay, in an Anganwadi, then you're trying to learn the ICDS system. Then, there's a malaria outbreak, and then you're like speaking to entomologists about mosquito control. And it's very random, okay? Like, when you're learning, like you're exposed to some 10 government programs, without you even like knowing about it, but you have to understand it on the go. And so like like when I was in Bombay, Malti Iyer used to say, this is a very steep learning curve. Like it's not something you can learn in a day. So, whereas I feel that, some of these well-oiled beats like crime and quotes, if you are writing only 300 words, it's not that difficult. You just sit in court, take down the arguments, and just construct a article. It's not a simplistic straight copy is not a hard one to pull out, right? So then in 2013, I left my job I had a child, I left my job in HT, and mostly because I was swamped, and I got dengue just after childbirth, and it was just all over the place. And I was also unhappy at that time because I felt that I did not get a raise that I deserved. I felt, like, I don't know, I didn't ask anyone, and I was stupid not to ask, but I felt that because I was pregnant, maybe I did not get a good raise. So anyway, I should not blame anyone because I didn't ask anyone anything. So, but I felt that it was a good move because, I did not have the constraints of working for a newspaper, and I wrote like for, as you said, I was really poor, but I could write on whatever I felt like. But I think, I mean, the poverty comes with it, you know, like if you want to write on whatever you feel like, you have to just depend on your partner, basically. You have to, I mean, something like that. Or you have to be rich enough early on. So that time I was writing for, you know, this magazine that Nisha edited, Yahoo Originals and Guardian, BBC. I mean, then in 2016 was it? Yeah, I started working for Scroll, and there I was allowed to travel for stories. And, you know, then I was exposed to like I was mostly writing in cities, and there I was exposed to like a lot of rural areas, towns, you know, different. I went to Chhattisgarh, UP, Andhra, Bihar. Really good experience. It helped me understand health systems and inequities better. You know, things that you read, you want to also see, right? I mean, that was what Scroll allowed me to do. But again, the pressure burned me out. I mean, the online magazine thing, and I left my job, and then I started. And I think at that time, because of this need to learn more and, you know, not produce, I started doing my MA program. And at the same time, I started a podcast on the TV program and various issues related to TB called Gasping for Breath for Suno India. Now I work as a consulting editor there. And but I can say I write on health, law, gender, nutrition. Maybe there's something I didn't cover, but we can talk about it later. But yeah, that's it.
Yeah. Thank you, Menika. It was great hearing your experience. I loved the Page Bharo Abhiyan, especially because I think that's something we have not, my generation has certainly not gone through, but I can understand very well that with PR companies, you know, when I was bureau chief with the Hindu in Mumbai, the PR companies, I mean, that was for me a new experience, you know, especially on health. And even till today, I'm still on some mailing list and I keep getting this, would you like to interview so-and-so who's a specialist in weight loss or whatever, you know? So I think that's the reality of what is called health reporting. I also thought it was significant that you said serious journalists when you talked about doing legal reporting. I think we're all very serious, those of us who write on environment and development and gender and all the other issues, but that's the perception. Somehow all the other stuff is serious and what we are doing is not. And I think the third thing about health reporting being a learning curve, because I think actually that a learning curve should be integral to whatever kind of reporting we do in journalism, right? Because we're not supposed to know everything. We're supposed to be not knowing, and therefore we can ask the obvious question. But I find increasingly that has gone out of the window. You know, journalists come in feeling that they have to act as if they know all. And as a result, I think what is lacking in the reporting is not enough questions are being asked, even the obvious ones. And actually, that's what the readers need to know. You know, they need to know the answers to those obvious questions. But if we as journalists are not asking them, that's not going to be reflected in our copy. And so on health issues, quite often, you know, when there is, say, dengue or any of these other diseases, there's so much lacking in that reporting because you can't, you know, people cannot understand where it started, where it ended, what is happening. Words are used, you know, jargon is used. I think you're the one who mentioned jargon, and Ramya did too. And with no consideration for the report, for the reader, for whom health is actually a very crucial issue, as we know, you know, regardless of what level in society they come from. Health is one of the most important things. Health is something that actually pushes so many people into poverty because of our, you know, pathetic public health system, forcing so many people to go in for private health. And yet we don't see that coming out, you know, because of the absence of that. I'm very glad you mentioned TB because I say this because I know in the early years when I certainly started, in newspapers, the beat reporters for health had to do all the public health facilities in the city. You know, that was like a routine. Now, it may have been a boring routine, but the point was, it meant that these public health facilities also knew that they were under the scrutiny of the media, that, you know, big newspapers were sending reporters to find out what was happening there, which I think helps in maintaining standards in these kind of places, which are accountable to us as the public. And that's the role the media ought to play. But I think much of that kind of routine has now gone out. So it's only when there's a crisis, as you were saying, then reporters are sent to a particular hospital to find out. But here in Bombay, we've seen JJ's hasn't got many things. There are hospitals where people are admitted and there is no drugs and no other things that are needed, for people. And forget about the oxygen during the pandemic. So yeah, I think there are a lot of things that we can come back to during the discussion. So let me move back to environment, and let me ask Chandrani to tell us. The Northeast is always an area that is fascinating for a number of issues, but for environment, certainly a very big one. One of my early assignments when I was with the Center for Science and Environment was to write about the state of the forests in the Northeast Himalayas. And that gave me so many insights into not just the issue that we were investigating, but the many layered complexities of the politics of that region, which you can't see an issue like environment apart from politics because it's very closely interlinked. And you did this amazing journey down the Brahmaputra, which is something that all of us who've seen it remember it as something to really cherish. So I want to ask you to talk about your own experience also as somebody reporting on the environment, but also whether, because you're based in the Northeast, is there an additional factor that you feel you face as a journalist based there, writing on these particular issues?
Yeah. First of all, thank you, NWMI, for giving me this opportunity to be among you. And congratulations to all of us for this 20th anniversary and the solidarity we have seen all along. And for me, I started my journey in 2011. I came back from Bangalore after completing my mass communication, and I joined a regional media house. So I started my career as a crime journalist in a regional media, and I have been covering crime, politics, and all that are seen as important and serious journalism, yeah, quote unquote. But the thing is that while I was doing that, something within me was not very much satisfied on my way of coverage, maybe the things which I really want to do. And since then, with every important political story, I try to find out something which is not much covered. So that has been the practice. And while doing it, I came across many environmental stories, many gender-based stories, and especially women. Women who have been suffering since a very long time, and nobody is there to hear their voices. And that's what made me think. And secondly, this river, I have been seeing it since my birth, and the river has been very inspiring to me. And I always wanted to know more about this river, Brahmaputra. And the curiosity inside has taken me a long way. Like, I keep on asking people, like, where do you stay? Is the river near to you? Like, do you have a story to tell? And this is something very not a very like short-term thing which happened. It took me almost 10 years of my life to create a network and do a story which is based on environment, conservation, wildlife, and yeah, political reporting has helped me a lot, because when you do political reporting, you also understand the nitty-gritty of politics involved in conservation and environment, and that gives you a better understanding to grab the importance of environment and how politics is involved in the narrative. So everything what's happening from climate change to afforestation, everything is related to politics. So with politics, the law comes, and with law, then again, like if you give a twist in the story, you can understand the entire narrative of what's the since like decades after decades, how our landscape is changing.
Another thing which is important about the northeastern region is that people think it's homogeneous. It's one place, northeast. We take it as northeastern region, and it's not. The geography is totally different. From Sikkim to Assam, Mizoram, Manipur, Arunachal, Tripura, Meghalaya. Every demography of the geography, the topography of this entire region is totally different. Communities are different. Every 100 kilometers, you will find a new language, different people. And that's what made the thing vast for me. So I have a vast region to cover. I have communities to cover. So that's what put me like my curiosity to know the culture of the people, to know about their livelihood, to know about their culture, and then relating it to the environment aspects of everything. So this is something which kept me going. And also I wasn't a freelancer in the beginning, so I was a salaried journalist. And what made me come into freelancing is that I didn't get a space to write about important environment aspects and climate change, and which I think was important during that time. So I only, like if I had to fight with my editor, like every now and then, it becomes very difficult for me to come up with all this narratives in a different way. So it had become very difficult for me, and I was not satisfied. So what I did is that I left my job, and then I started doing freelancing, and it started with environmental stories. And I'm very I was very happy, like in the beginning, because the space was I was welcomed. In fact, I was welcomed in doing so. And I saw so many people doing it in their own way, freelancing, and also the space which I got. So for me, I'm a multimedia journalist. I also write articles. Then I'm also into podcasts, and I shoot my own video, and I'm also a photographer. For me, I have got all the platforms. I have got all these platforms which welcome me with all the things I do, and in that way I could develop myself. I enhance my skills in doing so. And but one thing which I would like to also add on in my conversation with you, that is, it's not easy to become a freelancer, because with a good story, you need to research a lot about the story, and to research a lot, you need at least some savings for yourself. Otherwise, you know how the process starts. Like you put on all the effort, and then you put the invoice, and then your payment will be cleared. But I think that's the thing. Like for freelancers, people want to do freelancing. They come to me. They ask me like, if what tip would you like to give us? Like, we want to start freelancing. So my tip for you is, you have to save money to do good journalism. Also, I think you need to save money to do a good story, break a good story for your own investigation, research, and that's what. And talking about Northeast, climate change is something which has really affected the northeastern part of India, including all the states, the erratic weather, everything. And for me, if this is not important, what it will be? So if this is not taken seriously, what it will be? And when I started, I wanted that something important should come out of this urgent climate crisis we are going through, especially in the Eastern Himalayas. Otherwise, it will be very difficult if this cannot be taken care of by the government, by the policymakers, everything. We have to be our approach have to be very fast, very like strong. And I do believe in what I am doing, and I think passion is something you must have, whatever you do. So your passion will take you places. So that's what I would like to say, Kalpana.
Yeah, thank you, Chandrani. Um, yeah, I think this point you make about climate change is really important, not just for the Eastern Himalayas, but also for the Northern Himalayas. And, I had mentioned just now the IPCC report. In 2009, if you remember, the IPCC report had focused on the melting of the glaciers in the Himalayas. And now, that is what we call the flash floods. And we've seen it in these last years in Uttarakhand, in so many parts of the whole Himalayan belt. And yet there's not enough writing, because it affects people all the way downstream. But what to me is more important is what about the communities that live there, whose houses are being washed away, their fields are being washed away. And the process of, compensation for them is very long and arduous because, again, there's not enough media focus on them. And in addition to these realities of what is happening because of climate change, governments seem to just ignore all of it and, are building infrastructure projects that are adding to the conditions that we already face in those areas. The Char Dham project, which an expert committee set up by the Supreme Court has given very strong advice on how it ought not to go ahead the way it is going ahead. And yet it's just being ignored. And this is, over and over again. And I find that there's not enough editorial emphasis or, enough even campaigning on these issues, or if the groups are campaigning, we don't hear about it because we are not reporting about it, So I think unlike in the 80s, when something like the Narmada Bachao Andolan or post Bhopal and the 1984 gas tragedy, when the whole issue of industrial pollution came into focus and reporters were actually checking whether the pollution laws were being implemented, especially in smaller places which were away from media. I'll come back to you, Chandrani. Media highlight. I find all that has more or less vanished. It's as if industries are not polluting anymore, Are glaciers not melting? Are we not having flash floods, whether they take place in a big way or a small way? What is happening? Why are we not reporting? But we'll come back to that in the questions. Let me just finish everybody on the panel. So Jisha, I would like you to speak next. I know that you were not very confident about speaking in English, and also you didn't know whether you would have the time because you had other commitments. So you had made a video, but now that you're actually here, would you like to speak, or do you still want to show the video? Unmute yourself. Unmute yourself.
I'm so much happy to be here. Actually, I want to show this video because I just picked the words. It will lose our time.
Sure.
Thank you.
I am speaking to you on this panel at a time when there is intense conflict between the government and the public over their own homes over the Silver Line semi-expressway. Today, environmental journalism has long urged us to be more precise. Environmental journalism, however, has become an area where only those willing to face attacks, both online and offline. So, it has to be admitted that the number of male and female environmental journalists is lower in number than of other journalists. Hi, this is Jisha Elizabeth. I belong to Kerala. I work with a Malayalam news daily. I am so much interested in environmental journalism, which is again classified as climate change, coastal refugees, sea erosion, unscientific man-made structures in the sea like megaports and its impacts, crony capitalism, state terrorism, financial scams, loss of jobs, impacts over culture, economy, sports, education and traditional life, death, resilience, women and fisher empowerment, coral bleaching, suffering children and their survival, ecological remedies for climate change, accurate weather forecasts for safe working condition, amplifying indigenous knowledge, awareness building on marine conservation, quarrying and its impacts, landslides, floods, rehabilitation rights, etc. In 2017, Cyclone Oki hit the seas of Kerala. According to the latest government figures, 52 people died and 91 people missing. Thiruvananthapuram, the southernmost district of Kerala and the capital of Kerala, was the worst hit. This was followed by strong protest against the central and state governments in the fishing villages. They blamed the catastrophe on the failure to issue accurate weather warnings. At that time, I had re-entered the post of sub-editor in the Thiruvananthapuram unit after my maternity leave. The news and pictures of Oki were heartbreaking. I, on the other hand, was in a state of mental distress that some women face after childbirth. The news, full of deaths and tears, shook me even more. Sometime I sat at the desk and cried. Unable to cope up with my stress, I decided to quit my job. Thanks to my family and friends, I stayed here only because they gave me mental courage. I went to the homes of the victims of the Oki disaster. I saw babies younger or slightly older than my baby. It was heartbreaking to see the despair and orphanhood in the eyes of older children who can understand the loss due to death. That was my turning point. I studied more about climate change, cyclones, rising sea level, coastal erosion, man-made disasters, etc. The same time, I focused on the state and conglomerate alliance, corruption, bureaucratic interventions favoring corporates, life in rescue camps, etc. Now I know the seriousness of this beat. But at the same time, I know the environmental journalism is very dangerous to journalists because nowadays most of the mega projects relating to the environment or destructing the environment are doing by corporates or conglomerates. These corporations have formed nefarious alliance with governments. Therefore, those who write against the mega projects face defamation suits. Cases demanding crores of rupees in compensation have been registered in many places against many journalists. Some journalists lost their lives. Some lost their job. Some are facing cyber attack from the ruling party supporters. Some face police investigation in bogus cases, raid by enforcement department, etc. Kerala has been battered by severe natural calamities like 2 back-to-back floods, landslides, hurricane and heightened beach erosion in past few years. But we cannot just blame it on climate change. Rampant human intervention is equally responsible for the destruction of Kerala's southern coast. If we are to identify the major contributors, the list will be comprised of the breakwaters in Vizhinjam International Deep Sea Port, Mudalapuzhi Harbour and few villages adjacent to the Tamil Nadu border. The Vizhinjam Port Project authorities, they often drove me from the port site or the surrounding area when I went to pick up the news. However, I didn't shy away from writing news or publishing investigative reports. Vizhinjam port construction sites are still experiencing severe environmental impacts and deaths. 5 rows of houses wrecked in the sea. Fishermen live in rescue camps at schools and godowns. There was also news about Mudalapuzhi Estuary Harbour, where boats capsized and more than 50 people were beheaded due to the unscientific construction of breakwater. The government decided to do sand bypassing there as a temporary relief following my news. But the process is dragging on. Locals are protesting against the move to leave the beach to Adani, who arrived there promising a solution. Yes, I got international fellowships from the Earth Journalism Network. Got some training from them. I have bagged several environmental awards too. Fortunately, the media firm I work for provide more coverage of environmental news. But I know that is not the case in the other media organization. They drone the news for fear of corporates. They write pro-corporate news to please them. Nowadays, it is very difficult to find a source for environmental news. Government officials won't give you the documents or answers what you need. It costs a lot of money for people to dive under the sea like scuba divers. So it costs a lot of money to take direct evidence. Media companies operating on a relatively small budget do not have the capacity to bear these costs. The big media, on the other hand, stay away from such news. It can be said that alternative media outlets are better at reporting environmental news these days, but they are under constant surveillance by the governments. Indigenous community needs to be further promoted. Governments should try to scientifically analyze their indigenous knowledge and implement it for the common good. But journalists alone cannot compete with the corporations that are destroying the environment. It requires groups of environmental journalists. Such communities exist. Their number should be increased. The support system should be increased. Kerala is a state where there have been fierce struggles and environmental movements to protect the lion-tailed macaque and the Silent Valley. So we have the history. Last but the least, I wish to talk about my roots. I was a milkmaid. When all the kids my age went to play after school, I would run to the field to graze the cows to feed them. Growing up, I never thought I would get into a job of writing news about human marginalization due to climate change, urbanization, and human intervention in nature. But by the time I had to decide what my job should be in my 20s, I was convinced that I would become a journalist and bring out the injustice in society with my pen. That's how I got into journalism. Thank you all. Thank you for your patience.
Jisha, do you want to add anything?
Actually, environmental journalism is very dangerous, as I said earlier. Again, some panelists said that PR companies write reports for some beats. This is actually happens here. PR companies, on behalf of political parties or some such corporates, write news and give it to the reporters, and they just publish. They are not finding anything. They are not searching anything. What's behind it? What is behind? There is any scam or any environmental issues. They just publish everything as these PR companies gives you. So we need more journalists. We need more truth finders. That's what I want to say. We need more space. These alternative media are doing better and better and better. But these mainstream media are just closing their eyes to these actual problems. This is what I want to conclude. Thank you. Thank you for this.
Thank you very much, Isha. I think that video was very, it was very good to see that video and to see all the issues that people face in Kerala. And I think I like the way that you brought in the whole nexus between crony capitalism and what is happening in many of these environmental issues. So they can't be seen purely as environmental issues. They have to be located within what is happening in the politics and in the particular state from which we operate, which I think sometimes gets missed out in the reporting, and quite often it gets missed out because the media house that you're writing for will insist that you cannot actually pursue that particular angle. And I'm very glad also that you brought in this thing that when journalists actually do expose the nexus, for instance, the whole mining industry, we haven't touched on it because I don't think anybody's located in an area where, but this is a big issue now because, you know, the government is encouraging mining and indigenous communities and poor communities are getting displaced. And unless they organize, the media actually doesn't write about them, you know. it's as if the problem is not there, and suddenly the problem comes up, but the problem has been there building up for a long time. And that links up with your last point that you made about PR companies. I mean, I know for a fact also from talking to some people in PR, how they spoon feed journalists today. And that journalists take it because, as I think was it Menaka who talked about the Page Bharo Abhiyan. So I think when newspapers expect literally yardage to fill up space rather than quality, then when you have somebody from PR actually giving you a ready-made copy, the temptation then to go ahead and just, tweak it a little bit and print it is very great amongst journalists, and it's not frowned upon by the media organization. But what it does is really, it undercuts the whole basis of what we're talking about, the role of the media as a watchdog on these issues, the role of the media to make sure that what is reported, A, is accurate, B, is presented in a way that gets across to both the policymakers, but also to the ordinary people, so that it creates a consciousness in the reading public or the viewing public, if it is television. And that as a result of it, because of the consciousness that is raised, there is a pressure from, public and on government to actually lead to a policy change. I mean, that is what the media ought to be doing in many of these issues. So thank you very much. I think you brought out some very interesting points that the other panelists had not brought out. And I think they're very important to consider when we think about the future. Now, there are already some questions that have come in, and I would urge those who are listening into this discussion, please post your questions in the Q&A box. If you want it directed at one particular person on the panel, please do so. If it's a general question, I will raise it and then see whoever wants to answer. So one of the first questions that has come in is from Ammu Joseph. And she says, would you say health reporting, the importance of which has been suddenly recognized thanks to the pandemic, is still urban-centric? I think we touched a little bit on this. There was some excellent reporting from rural areas and small towns too in 2020, in the first wave of the pandemic. But it seems to have again become city-based. Do media houses allow /pay for reporters to travel for health stories? I think the answer is no, Ammu. Do you think the large-scale media job losses in 2020 has led to a situation where there aren't even enough regular reporters, let alone those specializing in subjects like health and environment? So, Ramya, would you like to take that, and maybe Menaka too afterwards? This whole thing of this urban-centric health reporting and what is being missed out in terms of rural reporting, and also the investment in this kind of reporting, because it can't be done sitting in the office. It does mean the media house has to pay, or the journalist who's an independent journalist has to find a way to raise the funds to go and do this kind of reporting. And I think the lack of that also affects the quality of the reporting. And the large scale, so many media houses have laid off people. So does it mean now reporters are doing more than one beat, and they, the luxury of having a specialized beat like health has gone for a toss in a sense, because everybody is expected to do much more than they did?
Yeah, absolutely. Kalpana, I think Ammu is also bang on when she talks about, urban-centric reporting. I'm afraid that is the case. Especially with large media, that is certainly the case. There's also a problem, as you pointed out, that there have been a lot of layoffs, both in mainstream media as well as in regional media, certainly in this state. I'm sure it's true of other states as well. And a lot of women, in fact, this is something we would like to talk about during the fellowship meeting. A lot of women have required support. In fact, the NWMI Chennai group, online group, has sort of evolved into like a LinkedIn, like a portal for where job requests, job announcements are made on a day-to-day basis. But believe me, this has become so important. So yes. Also, the other thing is that travel, I am not so sure. Some travel is allowed still, but people do, it's like, you go to a place and gather like, 5-6 stories, come back and write them. So earlier we used to travel every month regularly. Field visits were a key part of what we were doing, but that is not the case. The other thing is a lot of newspapers have lost their, in fact, in Tamil Nadu, that's a big advantage. It used to be a big advantage that they had a number of regional bureaus, but slowly all those bureaus have been closing down. The reporters have been moved to cities or moved to larger towns, and we are losing our reporters, which we, the points of view which we would have otherwise had if we had continued to keep them on our rolls. So undoubtedly, it's a very trying time for the media, not just, also for mainstream media, I'd like to add, because pay cuts were common, and a lot of cost cutting happened during these last 2 years. And I don't know if we are still out of it, whether the light is there at the end of the tunnel. These continue to be tough times, and I think it's essential maybe for us then to evolve new systems of doing these things, like for instance, citizen reporters, the people whom you can trust to give you input. Of course, paying them is very important. It's very difficult to, sort of contribute to organizations if you're not going to be paid. So we will have to, in fact, that's something we are thinking of as well. How do we evolve and adapt to these reduced circumstances and still ensure that we are able to do what we were able to do with the full complement of our resources and staff. Now, both in terms of resources and staff, you are right, and it's becoming very difficult to hold on to just one B. Because if we've lost people, we haven't really hired, exact replacements in terms of numbers as such. And so people have to do multiple things. It's that, like a friend of mine in Argentina once told me, we're all 360-degree reporters. We do reporting, we shoot the videos, we edit the videos, we put them online, we do the social media. So we are doing social media now. We are promoting our stories online. So this is part of the evolution of the media, and I think certainly something that we have to work around in order to produce good stories or even passable stories.
Menika?
Yeah, I think two things. I mean, I have to say I've not been so gutsy as to do a ton of COVID reporting, and that's mostly to do with me not being employed somewhere, right? I think freelancers are expected to be very brave, and not just freelancers, even reporters. Like once I heard of some very young journalists, like this is right in the beginning of the COVID pandemic when we didn't know enough about it, and he was sent to some hospital. He or she, I can't remember, but my sense was that like someone who is not employed, why should I take the risk and go? Secondly, lockdown, no ID card. At that time, I didn't have an ID card. I mean, these are real issues, and it's so silly. Like recently, I sent this young reporter. I sent her to an Anganwadi protest, and someone in Delhi, there's a huge Anganwadi protest, and someone from there asked her for her ID and asked her, like, what kind of stories do you write? And it's the polarized media. I mean, media, it's becoming very hard to sort of function without being employed also. Like, I mean, you have to fight out everywhere, and it's not pleasant. And I don't see why something that is not such a, high stakes story like covering a protest should need you to show. It's not like I'm going to Kashmir, right? I mean, should need you to show an ID card. So, these are the troubles for freelancers. And I told her that I would have given you a letter, but I just didn't expect that, in an Anganwadi protest, someone would sit and like ghirav you and ask you to show your Facebook profile or whatever, right? I mean, it didn't make any sense, but these are the problems. And, both the left wing and the right wing sort of, are somewhat equal in this, I feel, in this complete distrust towards media. So it's overall, like if you're not from, say, an NDTV or anywhere, and then it becomes harder to show where you're from, then it's a problem. So, and COVID particularly, I feel that, you know, I mean, why would I want to lose my life because I went to just go and report, right? I mean, I feel that you're expected to be brave. I don't want to do that. So I did less reporting, I have to say. So
Yeah, thanks.
Can I just quickly just a
So-
point to follow what Menaka said, that, you know, during the pandemic, we also lost our, like she said, it was difficult to go out and do the regular stuff. How do you do health reporting? You go speak to the patients, you go to the ward, and suddenly that was not possible anymore for us to do. So the situation also constrained us, apart from the resources and the, you know, the cuts and the layoffs, and that's it.
Yeah, thanks for that. I think that clarifies. We don't have much time, but there is one important question that I'd like the three, Jayashree and Chandrani and Jisha, to maybe respond to this. It also faces health journalists, but I think with environmental reporting, what's so central to it is the science, right? Apart from the impact on people. So Rohini has asked this question, Rohini Mohan, is how do you find, you know, when you do, how do you balance the science with the human stories? And how do you find the right experts who can speak in non-expert language? That's a huge challenge. So have the three of you who write on these environmental issues, have you faced that when you try and get, because you always have to try and reach out to an expert. So जयश्री तुम बताओ पहले कि आपको ये प्रॉब्लम रहा कि जब कोई स्टोरी करनी है और एक्सपर्ट का ओपिनियन लेना है तो कैसे मिलेगा, कौन सा एक्सपर्ट है जो कि सिंपली एक्सप्लेन कर सके कि क्या इशू है?
Okay, Kalpana, we are so fortunate in Pune that all our experts are equally expert in understanding the issues in English and in Hindi and in Marathi also, so our local language. So मैंने ऐसा प्रॉब्लम फेस नहीं किया कि किसी इशू पे मुझे एक्सपर्ट का कोट मिले या ना मिले, या एक्सपर्ट के कोट को एलॉबरेट करके हम कुछ लिखे उसके बारे में. तो क्लाइमेट चेंज के बारे में IMD एक अच्छा सोर्स है, और पुणे में हम सब जानते हैं पुणे में IMD का मेन ऑफिस है, तो हमें वहां से बहुत से सोर्स मिलते हैं. ऑफ कोर्स दे आर ऑल इन इंग्लिश, बट many experts in Pune हमें उसको मराठी में ट्रांसलेट करने में हेल्प करते हैं. और ओवर द इयर्स नाउ, आफ्टर 20 years, IMD कवर करते करते बात यहाँ तक पहुंची है कि हमारे पुणे में जो जर्नलिस्ट की यूनियन है, हमने इनिशिएट करके IMD की जो हमेशा यूज करने वाले टर्म्स हैं जो इंग्लिश में होते हैं, वो सब हमने लोकल लैंग्वेज में उसको क्या कहते हैं इसका एक पूरा वोकैबुलरी बनाया है. और उसमें more than 300 words we often use in English while covering IMD issues, और उसके बारे में जो न्यूज हम करते हैं उसके बारे में जो भी टर्म्स लगते हैं उन सबका हमने एक पूरा वोकैबुलरी इकट्ठा करके एज अ डिक्शनरी टाइप हमने वो तैयार किया है पेंडेमिक में. और अभी थोड़ी दिनों के बाद शायद पत्रकार संघ जो हमारा है जर्नलिस्ट यूनियन, वो उसको पब्लिश करने वाली है. तो वी होप सो कि वो जल्दी पब्लिश हो. तो ये हमारे लिए एक बहुत अच्छी बात रही कि जो अपकमिंग भी रिपोर्टर्स है जो मराठी लैंग्वेज के लिए काम करते हैं, उनको ये कवर करने के लिए इधर उधर भागना ना पड़े कि इसको क्या कहते हैं उसको क्या कहते हैं, या हर डिक्शनरी ढूंढनी ना पड़े उनको. तो ये एक बात है, इनिशिएटिव है. और दूसरी बात मैं एक कहना चाहूंगी कि अगर हम साइंस थोड़ा पीछे रखे, थोड़ा बाजू रखे, तो वन फैक्ट आई शुड लाइक टू शेयर विथ ऑल पीपल. हमेशा ऐसा दिखता है कि गवर्नमेंट ऑफिशियल्स और एनवायरमेंटलिस्ट इनमें एक कॉन्फ्लिक्ट सा लगा रहता है. तो हर बार ये होना जरूरी है क्या, ये बात है. मैं आपको एक एग्जांपल बताती हूँ.
जयश्री मुझे इंटरप्ट करना पड़ेगा क्योंकि जरा टाइम कम है.
ओके ओके.
हाँ, और मैं चाहती हूँ कि चंद्रानी और जिशा अगर उनको ब्रीफली कुछ इसमें कहना है. चंद्रानी एंड जिशा, if you have something brief to say on this, how you balance the human issue with expert comment. when you report on environmental issues? Please, Chandrani, why don't you go first?
Yes,
So I always go for the community narrative, which I use in my story to give it as a human feel. And I try to tend to ask the experts that please think that I know nothing about climate change, nothing. Please explain me as if like I am someone who is a layman and I don't understand anything. So I ask them until and unless I understand what he is saying, I don't take the quote, because it will become very scientific and the readers may not understand what the quote is. So basically that has to be if the relation is good with the researchers, scientists, and we are in a very like comfortable, they can tend to make us understand about the scientific approach to it. So they make it very layman language, they make us understand that. So that is very important for the story.
Jisha, do you have anything to add?
Yes, I agree with Chandrani what said right now. Actually, Rohini asked about science. Who creates this science? I am saying science. We have experts, scientists, and some other government officials are there, but we have also indigenous knowledge. That's their science. So we take these together and club it together. And as Chandrani said, if we know anything, I just say, I don't know, I can't understand. Please say in simple words, then I can tell to my readers. So they talk about it. But one thing you have to remember that if they are government officials, you will get information, but they won't allow us to write their names because they fear that they will lose job. Actually, these environmental reports are against the corporates or the government. So they fear that if they comment on their names, they will lose their job. So they will give you whatever information what you want in simple language, but just say, please don't write in my name. That's all. So you will get whatever information you want.
Thank you, Jisha. I'm being told that we've run out of time. I sound like these anchors on television when they have too many talking heads, and before anybody can complete whatever is being said, suddenly they say we are out of time. But we've had a lot of time to talk, and I think all of you, what you have said gives us reason to think about it. And I think one thing we can resolve, that let's forget about all this hard and soft. You know, what we've been doing is really hard work, and that has to continue. I think the second thing that is clear is that we have to find ways to get media houses to invest, because these are literally life and death issues that we're talking about, and they cannot be done sitting at a desk, reading reports, picking up the phone, speaking to a few experts. And I'm very glad that Jisha brought in this point, that we shouldn't privilege this thing of expert to be people who only talk of a particular kind of science, that there are also other forms of expertise that we must reckon with and acknowledge as media people, which lie in communities and in their experience, and bring it in, weave it in to these stories that we're talking about. So thank you everybody for being on this panel. You've given I hope everyone a lot to think about. These are conversations we certainly must continue in NWMI and in any other fora of which we are a part, because I don't see in the future that pandemics and diseases are going to disappear. Health is going to continue to be a very central concern. And as I said, with global warming and the latest IPCC report, you know, there's not going to be a day when we actually have to face these kind of environmental challenges. So thank you very much. And I'm so glad that NWMI has been able to do this kind of discussion, which has some solidity and meat. And it's really because of all of you and the kind of experiences you've had and the way you've shared it. So thank you.